Hello, Gregory. Welcome. Hello, John and Audrey. We'll get started in a minute or two. Hello, Karuna. Hello, Wasabi-chan. Welcome. All right, let's get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Atitang nang vagameya napatikang ke anagatang yadati tang pahinang tang napatang cha anagatang pachupanang chayo dhammang tatta tatta vipassati asamhirang asangkupang tang vidda manubruhaye ajeva kitchang atapang ko janya maranang suve Nahi sno sagarang tena mahasenena machuna evang viharing ataping ahoratang ataditang tangve baddekarato ti santo achikate muni. English? A single excellent knight's discourse. Let not a person revive the past, or on the future build his hopes, for the past has been left behind, and the future has not been reached. Instead, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state. Let him know that and be sure of it, invincibly, unshakably. Today the effort must be made. Tomorrow death may come, who knows? No bargain with mortality can keep him in his hordes away. But one who dwells thus ardently, relentlessly by day and by night, it is he the peaceful sage has said, who has had a single excellent night. Sad. All right, friends, it is Monday night at 7 p.m. New York time, and that means it is time for another festival of Dhamma with the Maggasekha community. It's time for Dhammapalooza. Dhammapalooza, as always, is community guided, which means that what kind of Dhamma activities we do is always directed by the community. Maybe you have questions you'd like me to answer, you can put those in the chat. If you have any topics you'd like me to give a talk on, you can put those in the chat. If you have any suttas that you'd like me to read, we can read as a community and go over, you can put those in the chat. And if nobody has anything, well, there's always a sutta in my back pocket for us to read. So I'll give it a few minutes to see what pops up in the chat, and we will decide what this Dhammapalooza will end up being. Hello, Yankee. Welcome. Hello? Holau? Holu? Hello, Dharma Learner. Good to see you. All right, give it another minute to see if anything pops up in the chat, and then if not, then we'll read a sutta. And if it's a chill night, I might end early. I'm kind of tired. Well, I think my body's been fighting off COVID for the last 4 days. Because my nephew, who's been staying here with me and my father, tested positive for COVID. He got sick. But I never got any symptoms, but I was definitely feeling like weak, like my immune system was fighting off something. So I think my powerful immune system fought off COVID, so I didn't get sick. But I've definitely been tired. So we'll see how it goes. All right, so, oh. Dharma Learner. Yeah, well, I love being on the discussion, Bhante Sarnapala's discussion panel. Problem is that I'm only on it for an hour because I have Dhammapalooza, right? It wasn't an issue. It wasn't too much of an issue earlier when I would have Dhammapalooza at 8 p.m. But I can't do late nights. Maybe in the future, if I have endless energy, I can do later again. But so now there's I have to end that early. And plus, there were very many good senior Bhantes there. Didn't need to hear anything from me. So that was very well attended because there hasn't been many Bhantes the last maybe 3 months, especially senior Bhantes. So this one was very well attended. It's still going on. It still has another 20 minutes, but let's see. Usually Bhante Saranapala, because Bhante Saranapala knows I leave, he usually says, even if there's 1 or 2 people with their hands up, 1 or 2 Bhantes, he'll say, Bhante Jayasara, what do you have to say about this? But because Bhante Rahula was there, 47 Vasa, as long as I've been alive, because there are very many senior Bhantes, and, thankfully Bhante Saranapala didn't just put me on the stand for a couple minutes. This is a very important topic to discuss. Is there anything you can discuss about not self in brief? Yeah, I don't like not self. I think soullessness is the best way to translate anatta. The reason being is because the Buddha does not deny the existence of a self, nor does he confirm the existence of a self. And it's very specific in the sutta that he's asked by Vacchagotta. The Buddha does not confirm nor deny. He doesn't answer the question, is there a self, is there not a self? Because he knew that Vacchagotta would have either gone to one extreme or the other, annihilationism or eternalism. But what has to be understood with anatta is not, is there a self, is there not a self? That's getting lost in the weeds. That is not really pertinent or important, especially when you start to understand anatta within your own experience. What is most important is to understand that whatever, even if you see yourself, I'm a created being, I am such and such, and I was born such and such, and this is what I like, this is what I don't like, etc. What is most important is the understanding that whatever you view as yourself is a misunderstanding, it's a delusion, and whatever creation of self that you have built up is not permanent, not stable, not dependable. There is no, as in Western, what we would say, soul. Bhante Silananda, who's one of my favorite monks in this world, and who was he lived at Bhavana for a little bit over a decade, and he was one of the main teachers there, along with Bhante Ji, and it was quite weird when I started teaching retreats, and there's I would be teaching retreats, especially when a lot of the young monks left and it was just me. So the retreat would be taught by Bhante Gunaratana, Bhante Silananda, and Bhante Jayasara. That was so weird to think about that. Even when I think about it today, it's still kind of weird. But Bhante Silananda used the word soulless. And I thought that was kind of weird. Why? Because I had, for well over a decade of Buddhist practice by that point, only heard not self or no self. And it felt weird. So I didn't like it at first. But when I looked up in the dictionary the word anatta, and it is one of the ways you can define anatta, soullessness. And I think that's the perfect for Westerners, for people who are very familiar with this idea of some kind of permanent essence, permanent soul, as the ancient Brahmanic culture would have been. It really cuts straight to the heart to say, no soul, soulless. Because we understand a soul to be some kind of permanent essence. That's the important thing to understand. Not, is there a self, is there not a self? That's not that important. The important thing is, any kind of self you might create, you need to know is void, is hollow, is devoid of any kind of permanent essence. It is literally manyati. It is created. It is imagined. And as the Buddha says, if Bhante Saranapala did put me on the spot, I was going to talk about the Bara Sutta, the burden, because all the other Bhantes would have covered all the major stuff. But the Buddha is quite clear in the Bara Sutta is one of the keys for anatta. Because in the Bara Sutta, the Buddha says, I will teach you the burden, the carrier of the person, the burden, the bringing up, the grabbing of the burden, the laying down of the burden, and the laying down of the burden. So those 5 things. What is the burden? The 5 aggregates subject to clinging. And as we know from the definition of dukkha, in short, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging is dukkha. So the burden is dukkha. The next one, who is the who is the carrier of the burden? The person. And in another sutta, not the Buddha, but Sariputta is asked, identity, what is identity? And Sariputta says, in the Buddha's dispensation, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are identity. So what is that telling you? 5 aggregates subject to clinging are dukkha. Identity is dukkha. The person carrying the burden is literally the burden itself. Because you have created this person, because you attach as this person, because you see things and experience things and identify things through this person, you are creating suffering. So the burden and the person that carries the burden is essentially one and the same thing. When you lay down the burden, you lay down the person, or the view of this person being some kind of permanent essence. The picking up of the burden is craving, second noble truth. The laying down of the burden is nirvana. Nibbana. Thank you. That's what I was trying to say. The laying down of the burden is awakening, right? Third noble truth. So when you understand that creation and attachment and identification with that creation as me, mine, myself, as some kind of permanent part of who I am, you have created suffering and you are carrying it around. When you start to see deeply, you start to see through, you have to start to understand anatta, then you start to see that whatever you think, this thought's not me, it's not mine, it's not myself, it's a thought that's arisen. I don't have to identify with it, I don't have to hold on to it, I don't have to follow it or listen to it, I can let it go. Right? That's the power of anatta. Whatever is arising, if it's pleasurable, it's not mine. No need to get overwhelmed about it. No need to get wrapped up in it. If it's painful, it's not mine. No need to get wrapped up in it. It's just pain arising. It's just pleasure arising. That's all it is. Now, of course, even myself, even though I've had insights into anatta for, well over 10 years at this point, that doesn't mean that I'm, only a fully awakened being has fully seen through anatta. Only a fully awakened being. So until I'm awakened, I'm still going to have lots of delusion regarding this. But at least in my practice over the years and my insight and my wisdom, I can at least reflect and understand and not automatically suffer for the most part. Because I see that this is not me. I don't have to identify with this. This is just something arising. And then a later, at least for me, a much later, years later insight was, yes, what is arising? Sure, I don't have to identify it as me. It's not part of some kind of permanent essence of who I am. However, I gave it energy. I created the causes and conditions for it to arise. So you have to recognize that what is arising is not you, not me, mine, myself, but due to dependent origination, due to the characteristics of existence, it's not arising for no reason. I have created the conditions for those things to arise. Over this lifetime, many lifetimes, I have created those conditions. And so once you realize, okay, I don't have to automatically identify with this as me, mine, myself. Once you realize, oh, I've set the groundwork for these to arise, I can set the groundwork for them to not arise, well, then the job is before you. The path is ahead of you. How do I set the groundwork for these not to arise? And that's the training. That's what you do. Every day it's not, is there a self, is there not a self? What was I, no, that's distraction. That's a waste of time. How do I set the groundwork for the abandoning of my attachment? That's the practice. That's important. Not thinking about, was I this? Who am I? What will I be? Am I this? No, that's all a distraction. Is there a self? Is there not a self? A waste of time, a distraction. Develop the causes and conditions for the abandoning of your suffering, and you will develop the causes and conditions for the abandoning of your view that there is some kind of permanent self. Krishna says, oh, I hope you had a pleasant weekend. It was okay. It was, pretty tired. But other than that, okay. Yes, of course. Well, there's a fear of death. There's a fear of ego annihilation. Right? So yes, if you have COVID, then you'll die. To be honest with you, I'm interested to see how I would handle it. I can't say that ever in my life I've really been close to death. My own death. I've been around lots of other people's death, holding people's hands when they die and stuff like that. But my own, I've been in some bad accidents that could have gone bad. Like seeing, huge lights coming at the car in the darkness. And when I was in college, it was pretty rough. But thankfully, everybody was okay in the end. But I've never really kind of had to directly deal with my own mortality. And so I'm quite interested to see how I'll handle it when it comes. We'll have to see. I'm not awakened, so obviously there's still attachment. Right? Obviously there is still identification. It is what it is. All right. I don't see any other questions. So why don't we read a sutta? The Great Elaboration. The Mahavidala Sutta. Now, some of you might know the more famous Chula Vidala Sutta. This is where the householder Visakha asks his former wife, Venerable Dhammadina, all the different questions. That's the lesser elaboration. This is the sutta before it, the greater elaboration. So let's read. At one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's grove, Anatta Pindika's monastery. Then, in the late afternoon, Venerable Mahakotita came out of retreat, went to Venerable Sariputta, and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he sat down to one side and said to Sariputta, Reverend, they speak of the witless person. How is a witless person defined? Dupanno. Yeah, this is the, I'm pretty sure this is the same word that the Buddha uses that's usually translated as foolish person, but also has a much harsher all right, no, this is a different word. So this is a synonym, because the other word that it has useless, useless person, but this is just foolish, stupid, and unintelligent. All right. They speak of a foolish, unintelligent, witless person. How is this person defined? Reverend, they're called a witless person because they don't understand. And what don't they understand? They don't understand this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, and this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. And by the way, the only person that truly understands the Four Noble Truths is an awakened being. So you are a witless person, just like myself. This is talking about unawakened beings. They're called witless because they don't understand. Saying, Good Reverend, Mahakotita approved and agreed with what Sariputta said. Then he asked another question. They speak of a wise person. How is a wise person defined? They're called wise because they understand. And what do they understand? They understand this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, and this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. They're called wise because they understand. They speak of consciousness. How is consciousness defined? It's called consciousness because it cognizes. And what does it cognize? It cognizes pain, pleasure, and neutral. It's called consciousness because it cognizes. Wisdom and consciousness, are these things mixed or separate? And can we completely disentangle them so as to describe the differences between them? Wisdom and consciousness. These things are mixed, not separate. And you can never completely disentangle them so as to describe the difference between them. For you understand what you cognize, and you cognize what you understand. That's why these things are mixed, not separate. And you can never completely disentangle them so as to describe the difference between them. What is the difference between these things that are mixed, not separate? The difference between these things is that wisdom should be developed, while consciousness should be completely understood. They speak of this thing called feeling. How is feeling defined? It's called feeling because it feels. And what does it feel? Pleasure, painful, and neutral. It's called feeling because it feels. They speak of this thing called perception. How is perception defined? It's called perception because it perceives. And what does it perceive? It perceives blue, yellow, red, and white. It's called perception because it perceives. Feeling, perception, and consciousness. Are these things mixed or separate? And can we completely disentangle them so as to describe the difference between them? Feeling, perception, and consciousness, these are mixed. These are 3 of the 5 aggregates. Form, feeling, perception, sankharas. I'm trying to think. Form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Yeah. And you can never completely disentangle them so as to describe the difference between them. For you perceive what you feel, and you cognize what you perceive. That's why these things are mixed, not separate. And you can never completely disentangle them so as to describe the difference between them. What can be known by purified mind consciousness released from what can be known by purified mind consciousness released from the five senses? Bhante Sujato has the thing here saying that this is indicating the fourth jhana. Aware that space is infinite, it can be known that dimension of infinite space. Aware that consciousness is infinite, it can know the dimension of infinite consciousness. Aware that there is nothing at all, it can know the dimension of nothingness. How do you understand something that can be known? You understand something that can be known with the eye of wisdom. What is the purpose of wisdom? The purpose of wisdom is direct knowledge, complete understanding, and giving up. How many conditions are there for the arising of right view? There are two conditions for the arising of right view: the voice of another and rational application of mind. So this is listening to a wise person speak and your own investigation. These are the two conditions for the arising of right view. When right view is supported by how many factors, does it have freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom as its fruits and benefit? When right view is supported by five factors, it has freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom as its fruit and benefit. It's when right view is supported by ethics, learning, discussion, serenity, and discernment. When right view is supported by these five factors, it has freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom as its fruit and benefit. How many states of existence are there? Reverend, there are these three states of existence: existence in the sensual realm, existence in the realm of luminous form, and the formless realm. But how is there rebirth into a new state of existence in the future? It's because of sentient beings shrouded by ignorance and fettered by craving, taking pleasure wherever they land. I quite like that statement. I'm gonna remember that. That pretty much is a great summary. All right. That's how there is rebirth into a new state of existence in the future. But how is there no rebirth into a new state of existence in the future? It's when ignorance fades away, knowledge arises, and craving ceases. That's how there is no rebirth into a new state of existence in the future. But what, Reverend, is the first jhana? Reverend, it's when a mendicant quite secluded from sensual pleasure, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and remains in the first jhana, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. This is called first jhana. By how many factors does the first jhana have? The first jhana has 5 factors. When a mendicant has entered the first jhana, vitaka vichara, placing the mind, keeping it connected, piti, rapture, bliss, sukha, and unification of mind are present. That's how the 5 the first jhana has 5 factors, but how many factors has the first jhana given up, and how many does it possess? The first jhana has given up 5 factors and possesses 5. The 5 factors given up are the 5 hindrances. When a mendicant has entered the first jhana, sensual desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt are given up. Placing the mind, keeping it connected, rapture and bliss and unification of mind are present. That's how the first jhana has given up 5 factors and possesses 5 factors. Reverend, these 5 faculties have different scopes and different ranges, and don't experience each other's scope and range. That is, the faculties of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. What do these 5 faculties with their different scopes and ranges have recourse to? What experiences their scope and range? These 5 faculties depend on what to continue. These 5 faculties depend on vitality to continue. But what does vitality depend on to continue? Vitality depends on warmth to continue. And what does warmth depend on to continue? Warmth depends on vitality to continue. So they depend on each other. Very similar to in the Nidana Samyutta, and then in the Samyutta Nikaya, we have a sutta where it's explained that name and form and consciousness don't arise without each other. Even though technically in the list, consciousness arises before name and form. But they don't really arise without each other. Just now I said you say vitality depends on warmth to continue, but I also understood you say warmth depends on vitality to continue. How then should we see the meaning of this statement? Well then, Reverend, I shall give you a simile. For by means of a simile, some sensible people understand the meaning of what is said. Suppose there was an oil lamp burning. The light appears dependent on the flame, and the flame appears dependent on the light. In the same way, vitality depends on warmth to continue, and warmth depends on vitality to continue. Are the vital forces the same things as phenomena that are felt, or are they different things? The vital forces are not the same thing as phenomena that are felt. For if the vital forces and the phenomena that are felt were the same thing, a mendicant who had attained the cessation of perception and feeling would not emerge from it. But because the vital forces and the phenomena that are felt are different things, a mendicant who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling can emerge from it. Cessation of perception and feeling is a special state that those who have become awakened can enter. Only awakened beings can enter the cessation of perception and feeling. How many things must this body lose before it lies forsaken, tossed aside like an insentient log? This body must lose 3 things before it. So basically, what things is lost for it to die? This body must lose 3 things before it lies forsaken, tossed aside like an insentient log: vitality, warmth, and consciousness. What's the difference between someone who has passed away and a mendicant who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling? This is an important question for these kind of things. When somebody dies, their physical, verbal, and mental processes have ceased and stilled. Their vitality is spent, their warmth is dissipated, and their faculties have disintegrated. When a mendicant has attained the cessation of perception and feeling, their physical, verbal, and mental processes have ceased and stilled, so that's the same. But their vitality is not spent, and their warmth is not dissipated, and their faculties are very clear. That's the difference between someone who has passed away and a mendicant who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling. How many conditions are necessary to attain the neutral release of the heart? 4 conditions are necessary to attain the neutral release of the heart: giving up pleasure and pain, an ending former happiness and sadness, mendicant enters and remains in the fourth jhana, without pleasure or pain, with pure equanimity and mindfulness. Neutral release of the heart. That's interesting. It's been a long time since I read the Majjhima Nikaya, so I obviously have read this, but I kind of, it's one of those things where after years and years, you read something again and something connects. So, because we think of Ceto Vimutti as like Metta Ceto Vimutti, but this is a neutral release of the heart. This is you could basically say this is release. This is like equanimity. This is like Upekkha Ceto Vimutti, right? And that makes sense because the fourth jhana only has equanimity and mindfulness. Everything else is temporarily gone. These four conditions are necessary to the attainment of neutral release of the heart. How many conditions are necessary to attain the signless release of the heart? 2 conditions are necessary to attain the signless release of the heart. Not focusing on any signs and focusing on the signless. These 2 conditions are necessary to attain the signless release of the heart. How many conditions are necessary to remain in the signless release of the heart? And just to clarify, this is technically release of mind. It's Ceto Vimutti. This is the Thai forest tradition that they translate Chitta as heart. So just to have that be clear. 3 conditions are necessary to remain in the signless release of the heart. Now focusing on the signs of signless and previous determination. These 3 conditions are necessary to remain in the signless release of the heart. And how many conditions are necessary to emerge from the signless release of the heart? I know a lot of this stuff is can sound complicated or doesn't really understand it, and maybe it's going over your heads, and that's normal. This is all like highly advanced meditative stuff in this section that we're going over. I can't even claim myself to understand all of these fully, especially because I've not experienced pretty much all of them. So if you're confused about this part, don't worry about it. This is a very complicated part when we're talking about release of cessation of perception and feeling and all of these jhanic style meditations. 2 conditions are necessary to emerge from the signless release of the heart, focusing on all signs and focusing on the signless. These conditions are necessary to emerge from the signless release of the heart. The limitless release of the heart, and the release of the heart through nothingness, and the release of the heart through emptiness, and the signless release of the heart. Do these things differ in both meaning and phrasing, or do they mean the same thing and differ only in phrasing? There is a way which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing, but there's also a way where they mean the same thing and differ only in phrasing. And what's the way in which these things differ both in meaning and phrasing? Firstly, a mendicant spreads a heart full of love to one direction. So this is, and you see this actually in the next sutta too, 120. Oh no, not the next sutta, 127, Anuruddha Sutta, where there's a kind of question about limitless release, Appamana Ceto Vimutti, and Mahagada Ceto Vimutti. So this is, Appamana Ceto Vimutti. So this is the same thing. So Appamana Ceto Vimutti is the stock way that the Buddha teaches how to practice metta in the suttas. First, a mendicant meditates spreading a heart full of love to one direction, to the second, to the third, and to the fourth, and all in the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around. They spread the heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. They meditate spreading a heart full of compassion, karuna, of a heart full of rejoicing, mudita, a heart full of equanimity, to one direction, then to the second, then to the third, and to the fourth, In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, and all around, they spread a heart full of equanimity to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free from enmity and ill will. And what is the release of the heart through nothingness? It's when a mendicant going totally beyond the dimension of infinite consciousness, so now we're in the arupa attainments, the formless attainments, aware that there is nothing at all, enters or remains in the dimension of nothingness. This is called the heart's release of nothingness. So, as we see here, this is not like a special thing. Cheto, this is essentially another way of saying the formless attainment on nothingness. That's really what this is saying. And what is the release of the heart through emptiness? It's when a mendicant has gone to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, an empty hut, and reflects like this. This is empty of self, or what belongs of a self. This is called the release of the heart through emptiness. And what is the signless release of heart? It's when a mendicant, not focusing on any signs, enters or remains in the signless immersion of the heart. This is called the signless release of the heart. This is the way in which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing, in which the way they mean the same thing and differ only in the phrasing. Greed, hatred, and delusion are makers of limits. A mendicant who has ended the defilements, has given these up, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, and obliterated them so they are unable to arise in the future. The unshakable release of heart is said to be the best kind of limitless release of heart. The unshakable release of heart is empty of greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed is something, hate is something, delusion is something. A mendicant who has ended the defilements and has given these up, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, and obliterated them so they are unable to arise in the future. The unshakable release of heart is said to be the best kind of release of heart through nothingness. That unshakable release of the heart is empty of greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, hatred, and delusion are makers of signs. A mendicant who has ended the defilements, has given these up, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, and obliterated them so they are unable to arise in the future. Nimitta Karano, creators of signs. Greed, hatred, and delusion create. Right? We were talking about how we create this being. We were just talking about that with Anatta. The unshakable release of heart is said to be the best kind of signless release of heart. The unshakable release of heart is empty of greed, hatred, and delusion. This is the way in which they mean the same and differ only in phrasing. This is what Venerable Sariputta said. Satisfied, the Venerable Mahakotita approved what Sariputta said. All right. Let's see. I think we have almost 8 o'clock. I think I'm going to call it a night. I think we're good. So, all right, friends. Well, Sukhi Hotu, may you be happy and at ease. Practice well and be well. And may you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again. Have a good week.